Welcome back to JL Percussion. Today we're going to do a video on the piece Feeling Better by Ivan Trevino. And I'm just going to give you some notes as to how you can approach this piece, some things to look out for, and some tips and tricks. So here we go. The first thing we need to consider when starting this piece is our tone production. I would be very careful with what mallets you choose to play for this piece. I went with the Innovative Percussion IP200 Solo Series medium soft marimba mallets. Okay, they give me a pretty rich tone in the low end over here and are still able to be clear in the high end with a little bit of firming up on the grip. So you got rich tones down here and then up at the top. Doesn't take a lot and it's good. I mean, I like the sound of these mallets. Okay. Something we need to focus on when we're thinking about tone production for this piece are avoiding yarn swipes. Okay, in preparing for this solo with these mallets, I did find that I would run into these from time to time. So I had to adjust how firm I was holding the mallets to be a little bit more firm that I'm used to, and I would focus on playing each note in the vertical axis before moving on to the next bar. Okay, it's kind of like when you're on quads or tenors, when you try to play a scrape, right? You kind of go from one note to the next, and people tend to just focus on the changing of the drum, the X axis, but the y-axis gets ignored. Okay, so the yarn swipe would be more pronounced if the strokes were a little bit more angled in preparing to strike the next bars. So if you're coming at a note from an angle and you're loose, especially when you're soft. This is basically the sound I'm talking about. You can hear that yarn. As I get louder, you can hear it still. I hope these microphones are picking it up. But we're trying to avoid that. So focus on the vertical stroke wherever you're going. Another thing to consider is the tempo. The tempo is marked at around 100. I take that to mean you can go a little bit slower or a little faster if you like. I settled into trying to play at around 96 or so. You should choose a tempo that feels comfortable to play while still maintaining the character of the piece. You should also consider your abilities to play certain sections. For instance, the happy and groovy section should definitely groove, so no going too fast on that. And if you're an intermediate percussionist or beginner percussionist, you'll notice that this piece is in bass clef, so make sure you are familiar with the notes on the staff. We're ranging from C3 to G5. Alright, so let's talk about the first section, very intro. Right, we're doing a 16 note quarter notes. Be a piano, so nice and soft, and be careful not to rush the quarter note rests. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2, 3, 4, 1E and a 2. Okay, so watch out for that. So as we get into the next section, you see that we have the subtle articulation notated there. So we have some tunable accents, and that's just going to give a little bit of extra weight to that note. Don't overdo it by playing them as full-on accents, right? So check this out. The downbeats are heard clearly, right? And the right hand that has that same repetitive note, the make it a full-on accent. Okay, avoid accent tap type of playing for this stuff, right? We're not on the drum line right now. We're playing concert marimba, a solo. We don't want to do stuff like, okay, and all the inner beats or all the taps are just at piano or tap height. We need to scale our non-accented notes to tenuto accents and to accents within their own dynamic level. Okay? Another thing to watch out for in this passage, measures 9 through 16, is your timing of your right hand. Because it has the E's and the U's, you have to be anchored in your left hand on the downbeats. Okay, so spend some time with the metronome to keep yourself in time here. And don't push the 16 notes on beat 1. So if I got a metronome going here, and I will put us at about 96, and we'll go a little slower. Since this is a guide, let's do 80. Okay, and I like to have the metronome on the 60 notes because it keeps me nice and honest. So you lock in that left hand, and that right hand just stays on the E's and U's, nice and easy. So another thing you might tend to do is rush the 60 notes on beat 1, okay? And especially be careful with the crescendo in measure 16. To 1, not overdo it. Don't overdo the crescendo. We're only going to mezzo piano. And to 2, to not rush into the next section. I remind myself that fast is not a stick height. So here's measure 16. Okay. Can't rush that and can't get too loud. And that's our mezzo piano dynamic. Okay. All right. Take a look at the next section, measures 17 through 32. Here we have phrase markings that are for 2 bars. So if you choose to mark the start of the phrase with a slight accent or a little bit of weight, don't make it at the start of each bar. It can be tempting, especially considering where the tenuto accents are. Okay, so just be careful with that. So here's what I mean by that. Versus every bar. Okay, so avoid that. Make sure it is just at the start of the phrase marking. All right. The of each beat in the second bar of each phrase, it has a tenuto marking, right? You might tend to rush into those sections, but keep your left hand rooted in the 8th note pulse in the time. Okay, so you definitely want to spend a lot of time with the metronome to keep yourself accountable. So here we go. When I first started learning this piece and I started getting off the metronome, I found myself rushing there. So if it happened to me, it could happen to other people. All right. Beating spots here. We're going to take special care to align your beating spots. Because of the nature of the 16-note patterns here, you might find it easier to split the resonators. Okay? Here and here, right? Right in front of the left, or left in front of right. However, I think you should strive to maintain the same line of beating spots. Okay, either the top of the resonator or the bottom of the resonator to get a more consistent sound. I opted to aim for the top of the resonator. Okay, so we're shooting for this. Versus playing like this, where maybe it'll be a little bit more comfortable. But I think if you play in the same line, it'll be to your benefit. All right, and thing to consider here also is the note accuracy. Okay, the notes that are going to catch you unawares are actually the inner beats. The E's and the ands. 1 E and a. 1 E and a. 1 E and. So the C and the D in this case, right? We tend to focus on the notes that change and are obviously contributing to the melody and harmony of the piece so much that we take the other notes for granted. In trying to record the most accurate take possible, I found these notes were giving me the most trouble. So remember, don't just focus on the accented notes and the downbeats. Every time that the chord changes, so does the distance to get back to those inner notes, and that's something that you cannot ignore, okay? Now the left hand has to travel more from G to D. Okay, so here's what I mean. First we're going from A to D. With our left hand. Okay, and then the next part, we're going from G to D. Down to fifth. And then from F to D. Okay, that's sixth. And then the right hand also changes. So we're going from G to C here. That's where accuracy might start to slip, so be careful with that. So measure 32, we have a subito piano crescendo. Subito means suddenly, so you suddenly have to drop down to piano here. I like to push the dynamic in the previous measure, measure 31, to make the subito that much more impactful. Contrast is your friend when you're working on your dynamic achievements. So let me start 2 measures before that. Here's measure 30. Drop down to a nice mental forte crescendo. Notice in 31 here, I crescendo, drop down, and we get to measure 33, happy and groovy. All right, so we have a note here, happy and groovy, voiced towards the right hand, right? I took this to mean that the right hand is to be more prominent than the left hand. The melody, if you will. Learning this part is going to be more tricky than the rest of this piece, but if you can learn this part, then you can learn the whole piece. Should have it in the bag, no problem. If we're voicing to the right hand, my right hand should be louder. You need that 16th note on the metronome all the way through, so you have no doubt as to where anything lands. Okay? And the notes follow a little bit of a pseudo pattern that you might be able to pick up. For example, in measure 37 through 40 and 45 through 48, the left hand moves back and forth from F to G, never repeating it up. Alright, so here's 37. Okay, so that happens in both of those spots. And then measure 41 through 44 are almost identical to 33 through 36. However, they have one beat fills added at the end of each bar, except for the last one at measure 44. So let's take a look at that section. Measures 41 through 44. That's your new material with a downbeat. Because before you didn't have it, you just had. Okay, you're coming on the F C. But with the fill, then it continues from that old material. Okay, so you got that. And let's check out start at 41 again. Okay, ACA, downbeat. Triplets fill in on measure 43. Now, measure 43, you got to be careful to stay in the 60-note subdivision all the way up until the first note of the triplet. Okay. Because the tendency is going to do exactly what I just did, is to make these two notes triplets as well, and we don't want to do that. Then measures 37 through 40 and 45 through 48 are almost identical as well, with measure 48 being the outlier, by leaving off the last beat from measure 40. Okay, and that sets you up for the new piece. Because before you had the 4E. Okay? Alright, and also, be careful with the dynamics in this section. Measure 38 has a little swell. I like to call that swells, where you crescendo and then you decrescendo. But measure 40 has a crescendo all the way through. So here's the 38 one. And then 40. So you hear the difference. There's got to be a difference there. So let's go try to play through this happy and groovy section. Just remember that your double stops need to strike the bars at the same time to avoid any flam sounds. Okay, so you gotta play not just the notes of the rhythms, but you gotta play clean. Playing these double stops in this section might be a little bit more difficult than you're used to playing when you practice double stops, because we're trying to voice towards the right hand, right? So we have to play double stops with uneven heights on purpose, right? So instead of a flam sound, okay, and this might be a bit of an exaggeration, maybe it's like here. But we have to work on eliminating any flams, even though they're different heights, because our default way to play a flam is, all right, just keep the grace note down and bring the primary note up and you got your flam. But in this case, we got to strive to play cleanly at different heights on each hand. So it might be a little bit tougher than you first think. So keep that in mind. Next section measures 49 through 65, most of the third page. This is a variation of measures 17 through 32. Same notes, same harmonic rhythm, but different order, and this new order makes it easy to groove to, in my opinion. Since this section is at forte, really bring out the tenuto accents, a good approach is to lower the inner notes to give those accents a little more boost. And as noted in the score by similar articulation, written in measure 50, okay, keep those same tenuto accents all the way to the end of the section marked by the fermata. We haven't got there yet, but I opted to add my own tenuto accents in measures 64 and 65 on the G's and the C's. And you'll see what I mean when we get to it. So, we're forte now, and we have tenuto accents. Okay, and I got my inner beats a little bit lower. Same chords as before. Okay, cool. We ended there at the downbeat of 57. Okay, so measures 57 through 60 starts with the main idea again that we just did. However, this time the jumps to the G's and the A's are interwoven with each of the chords in the first 4 bars. So we have our A, now it gets a G, A again, and then an A at the top, and then the G chord does the same thing. Okay, measure 61 and 62, you go back to your original counterparts. And then we get to measure 63, where we begin to get softer and slow down while keeping the tenuto accent groove in place. We get to 65, what I talked about earlier. The established groove is done, and we get into groups of 3, pivoting around the B. So I put the accents on G and C, and we're slowing down and getting softer, but I still have those accents in there. Alright, then we come to the last page, measure 66 to the end. And surprise, it's in treble clef now. However, it's just the same notes as the beginning, except now that they're an octave higher. Make sure it's slower than before, acting as kind of like a mental pause of the piece that you just went through. Okay, and when we get to the end, we're slowing down here, and you're done. You slow down to 72. Cool. I think I covered pretty much everything I had taken notes on, but if you have any other questions about this piece, leave me a comment and I'll get back to you. If you found this video helpful, leave a like and subscribe. And be sure to pass this on to anyone you know who's learning this piece or plans to learn it in the future. Happy practicing!